Jane, when we talk about family conflict, why don't you start diving in, talking about, what is the good? You talk about good conflict, bad conflict, and the ugly conflict. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, let's start with the ugly, because that's always the fun, entertaining part, and the place no family would ever want to be. That's what makes movies and TV shows and great books. And back when everyone read a newspaper that was made of paper, front page news, or maybe the style section because it's gossip worthy. No one wants to be there. That's the sort of thing where all the dirty laundry is out. When we're talking about communication, we're certainly not talking about that. And there's always an undercurrent there of someone trying to make someone else look bad, make themselves look good. There's a motivation behind the ugly conflict usually. Now we'll back up for a moment to the bad. The bad is what we focus on. It's what people talk about generally when they say conflict. They think it's always bad. It is, some would say, inevitable. I would disagree. It is insurmountable once it takes hold. I thoroughly disagree with that idea. Sometimes it is simply the fact that we have different perceptions, we have different needs, we have different life experiences, we have different expectations. And where the communication part comes in is if I think I know what your ideas are, and I assume from my beliefs things that aren't true, things that are unduly negative, better that we have a conversation and we find ways to honor each other's intentions, expectations, and needs, and then move on into a more positive type of conflict that I call good conflict. And that is the collaborative and creative type. That's where innovation comes from. If we all thought exactly the same, there would be no new ideas. It would be too difficult to try to understand, well, where do we go from here? Because we're in lockstep. We don't know what to do now. But the spark of imagination is, to my mind, good conflict. But you need to have the communications, you need to be open to those new ideas to allow them to come forward.
Love it. It's Brene Brown is big on, out there right now. And if my team and I read one of her books, we love the word rumble. And, that word for us means good conflict, because, it's, you don't have to agree. We have to get these thoughts out there. And I'm one of those D-type personalities. I'm a DI, which means, for me, that, I like to win, and I want to talk about it. and other people might not get their words in. And so it's, a real chore for me to remember to sit back and listen, because some of the best stuff is when people don't agree with me, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Michael, may I share something that I find interesting, which is the assessment tool that you're talking about? Well known, not nearly as well known, is a tool that I recently became certified to use as a practitioner, and that is called the Conflict Dynamics Profile.
Okay.
Based on research done at the Mediation Training Institute, and they are quite clearly focused, based on their research, on behaviors, not personalities, not styles. In part because it is easier for us regular people to focus on one or two of our behaviors that are not so good. Like eye rolling would be near the top of everyone's list, I think, and to try to get that under control. And the flip side of that is to get better at using the good behaviors that we have. But quite interesting and not very well known.
Appreciate it. Susan, you want to chime in on what you see in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly of family conflict?
The good, the bad, and the ugly of family conflict. Well, the ugliest is, in my experience, generally around marital disputes, which I know is not something that Jane, and good for her, it's not something that she likes to do. When I think about prenuptial agreements and I think about guiding families around the issues of prenuptial agreements, I tend not to delve too deeply into the legality of it, the things that the lawyers will tell you, like make sure each party is separately represented and make sure that there's full disclosure and all those sorts of legal things. When I tried to guide families around prenups, not surprisingly, I tried to guide them in the area of communication, because the image that stays with me is a long married couple after 42 years of marriage, where the wife turned to her husband in my office and said, "Your mother never trusted me because 42 years ago, they made me sign that stinking prenup agreement. And for 42 years of marriage, she held a grudge against her long deceased in-laws." So sure, by all means, make sure there's full financial disclosure, make sure there's all the different things that the lawyer is going to tell you. But the most important thing is to make sure that there's plenty of time for both parties to consider the pros and the cons. Make sure all of this happens long before the wedding invitations go out. We all know that story of Barry Bonds, who allegedly in the limo on the way to the wedding tossed a prenup into his intended's lap and said, "If you don't sign it, the wedding is off." And, you know, of course, that was deemed to be undue duress, and the agreement was set aside. The main thing really for parents for whom having a prenup is going to be part of the expectation for their children is to make sure that that expectation is on the table before your kids even hit dating age, because then it's not personal. Then it's not, "You never liked this person I'm about to marry," but no matter who you marry, whether it is someone vastly less wealthy than we, or even someone vastly wealthier than we are, it is something that we are going to insist on. A corollary to that, and one I have seen work particularly well if there's more than one child, is to encourage your children to enter into a pact among themselves with each other, that no matter who they marry, as an element of responsible stewardship of the family's wealth, they are going to make sure they all have prenups before they get married. And then it's not personal to the dreaded, you know, mother-in-law, but rather it's something that we're all doing as siblings to act as responsible siblings. And I've seen that work really well. So again, like Jane, my focus is on communication, it's on conflict avoidance before it happens. And it's not so much on the legalities, because there are practicing lawyers who are going to be better advisors on that, but rather I can help families before it turns ugly, enter into some of these potentially ugly conversations.
Love it. You know, when you said that, go ahead, Jane.
Just so true.
Your turn. I love it.
It's the and I have seen an instance just jumps to mind where, of course, I'm hearing all of this third hand at best, but the intended is so offended that this topic has come up, and it's far, far in advance. There's no wedding date, that it is way in advance. So that part went well, but the adult child of the family, and in this instance, there was not an operating family business, but there was enough wealth that the family had had conversations with the children very early on, that adult child was able to say to the intended, "This has nothing to do with you. I knew about this long before I met you." So just to what Susan was saying, if you get it out there before they can meet that perfect love match, then that person is in the position to say, "I guarantee it's nothing to do with you. I've known about this for so long before I knew you."
Love it. Yeah, you know, what makes me, the phrase that comes to mind is, when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today.